Good morning, everyone. I'm here on behalf of the National Forest Ecosystem Improvement Act of 2017 workshop group. And first and foremost, I want to thank my peers who helped me to create today's presentation, as well as Dr. Matt Palmer, who gave us plenty of support and advice throughout this whole semester. There are many problems that are affecting our national forests, some of which I'm going to be able to touch on today. For example, wildfires have caused billions in dollars of damage to both urban and forest environments recently. Pests like bark beetles are affecting massive areas of the United States, and water quality in watersheds is decreasing. Since 2000, wildfires and pests have affected about 75 million acres of national forests located in the western United States alone, which equates to about 40% of the land the USDA Forest Service manages nationwide. And this is the federal agency that oversees national forests. Now, it's important to note that these disturbances increase soil erosion and runoff, which contaminates watersheds. This is critical because this agency also manages land that contains 20% of the nation's fresh water supply. While climate change is a major factor in many of these issues, mismanagement or a lack of management can be to blame for some of this degradation of forest health. This figure shows that the cost of fighting fires has increased drastically. The Forest Service, a branch of the USDA, is projected to burn through 2/3 of its budget by 2025. Across the country, this agency has focused on fire suppression without much preventative management. Even though the USDA is spending more, large wildfires are increasing in severity and number. It's important to point out that the amount of variability between years is a sign that climate change is a factor in this increase. In a statement made earlier this year, the Forest Service chief, Tom Tidwell, proclaimed that an area the size of Pennsylvania and New York, which is 1/3 the size of the National Forest System, is at a high risk of wildfire. While active forest management can potentially reduce the severity of these events, the long-term trends of wildfire activity is affected by many other factors as well. So, Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming introduced this act to attempt to counteract these problems. It aims to increase management activities to decrease the amount of overgrown forests while increasing revenue for the USDA. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to primarily focus on the first two issues this act addresses. However, all of them are interconnected. And before I move on, I want to make it clear that fires are a vital component of forest ecosystems. Forests depend on them. They allow forests to have a mix of various ages and tree types, particularly low severity fires. However, high severity fires change soil structures to inhibit future growth of forests. An example of how all these problems are related is the 2012 North Buffalo Fire, which took place in northwest Wyoming in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. It started on August 24th of that year and burned for 2 months. It burned about 28,000 acres, an area twice the size of New York's Manhattan Island, 1/3 of which was burned at high severity, which can be seen on the right-hand side. On September 20th, an air monitoring station in Jackson, Wyoming, 30 miles away, detected 640 metric tons of particulate matter measured at 2.5 millimeters. According to the EPA, it would take 11.6 million passenger vehicles a year of regular driving to emit that much material. This picture is taken of an aerial assessment of the region before the fire took place. According to the assessment, fuel for the fire consisted of mixed conifer species and beetle-killed trees. This report declared that between 2002 and 2010, beetles killed trees in about half of the watersheds in this national forest. Other factors that made this wildfire severe was that no other wildfires or timber harvesting had occurred in the specific burn area since 1988. Plus, the state of Wyoming in 2012 received about half of its average annual precipitation that year, which exacerbated all of these problems. In other words, the forest was overgrown with water stress and beetle-killed trees, which caused fuel loads to be high. This example shows how there are some natural variables that are hard to control, but there are management activities that can at least reduce the severity of these events. To mitigate future wildfires, this act outlines definitive management goals for the Forest Service to conduct annually and sets a minimum of 1 million acres of prescribed fires or low-intensity controlled burns and 1 million acres of mechanical thinning. On average, since 2000, the Forest Service has conducted about 1.1 million acres annually of prescribed burning across national forests. So this should just be business as usual for this agency. However, the real change is going to be in meeting the second requirement, 1 million acres of mechanical thinning, 400,000 of which are supposed to come from commercial thinning, and 60,000 acres from even-age management. It's important to note that all these are minimum requirements, so this agency may choose to exceed these numbers. Also, the Act does not describe priority areas where these are most needed. Prescribed fires can be described as carefully planned, low-intensity burns that eliminate surface litter and ladder fuels from forests. Ladder fuels can be described as mid-sized trees and shrubs that allow flames to grow from the ground floor up to larger trees during wildfires. This picture shows how flame lengths are kept short during a prescribed fire to only burn the understory. Since the understory regenerates quickly, it's important to do this frequently in order to keep fuel loads at a minimum. This plot shows that the Forest Service is going to need a change in order to meet this mechanical thinning requirement. As recently as 1990, the Forest Service conducted about 900,000 acres of mechanical thinning across Forest Service lands. However, it has not come close to the 1 million acre requirement in recent years. And this is largely due in part to some environmental regulations that will be researched further next semester. Also, the USDA makes much less money from these activities as well. So what is even-age management? Even-age management can be described as the managing of a small plot of individual trees so that all the remaining individuals are similarly sized. This can be done in a few ways, two of which are seen here: clear cutting and seed cutting. Clear cutting removes all of the trees in a specific area of a forest, and then regeneration happens. And that's seen on the left. That's a few years after a clear cut to show what that regeneration looks like. And then a seed cut is a little different because some of the larger trees are initially kept as planted seedlings are allowed to grow and establish themselves. Once they are established, these larger trees are also cut to sell. So both of these, at the end of these techniques, leave a similarly aged cohort of trees. This is important because on a forest landscape level, when done at different times in different areas, it promotes different ages and types of trees to allow the health of the forest to improve. It also acts as temporary fire lines for future wildfire events to mitigate the spread. And commercial thinning is the removal of trees in an overcrowded forest. The USDA, in this example of a California national forest, decided to remove trees before they got unhealthy as this area was experiencing drought conditions. Before thinning, there were about 300 trees per acre, and afterwards they thinned it down to about 100 trees. This did a few things. It reduced fuel loads in the area, but it also improved the individual health of the trees, of the remaining trees, so they're more resistant to things like beetle outbreaks and future wildfires. And it's important to note that the Forest Service made most of its money by selling the larger trees as timber. So it removed smaller and larger trees, but it made most of its money selling the larger ones. Now, non-commercial thinning is a similar concept to commercial thinning, with one big difference. It does not make money for the Forest Service. It's the removal of dead or unhealthy trees from forests. A dead tree ready for removal is seen on the left, and crews typically either burn them on site in piles, as seen on the right, or haul them off site as salvage. However, even though this costs them money to conduct, it's still important to do because it improves the overall health of the forest to mitigate future events like wildfires by reducing fuel loads. However, some controversies exist. After even-age management, soil erosion is high until the planted or self-regenerative area of trees allows itself to reestablish. During that time, any soil runoff that happens is important because while timber is a renewable resource, it takes 1,000 years to generate 3 centimeters of topsoil. So any runoff that might happen is a problem. Also, overlogging a specific region of a forest can cause problems in terms of regrowth patterns and do things like fragment habitats. Next, prescribed fires have been studied to emit air pollutants that are detrimental to human health. Also, some get out of control and turn into wildfires, and this has been seen a few instances across news channels. However, even though this might cause potential lawsuits and damage, specifically property loss, studies show that 99% of these are conducted as planned. So in conclusion, time, money, and personnel are needed to reach the goals of this act, specifically the mechanical thinning portion. Once implemented, it will be difficult to measure its success because forest ecosystems range in their access to resources, type, and just vary naturally. And this makes it difficult to attribute changes in management activities to changes in the environment. Plus, the Act does not describe how the USDA should measure its success. In general, success would mean fewer large fires, cleaner water, less infestations, and more profitable timber sales. Since the health of forests is measured with trends and the effects of climate change are uncertain, it will take years to assess whether or not this act is successful from an environmental perspective. For these reasons, in the words of our director, Steve Cohen, we can't seem to fix problems. We can only make them less bad. On behalf of my team, thank you for listening.
Hi, great presentation. I'm wondering, you'd mentioned how the commercial thinning that the Forest Service does is something that they can use to generate profits. Did you guys do any research on how much money is made through these activities every year?
Based on the trend that we had in that plot here, this kind of shows the secondary axis on the right side shows how much money they make per year from all thinning activities. That includes even age management and commercial as well. So most of their money is made from even age management because it's just more efficient. You go in and take out all the trees from a specific area and you sell all of them because they're all the same size. So typically much more money is made from even age management than commercial thinning. Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm curious as to what recommendations you would give for forest health in the context of reforestation. There's obviously a lot of efforts underway to use forests as a carbon sink, but in this case you were focusing heavily on thinning for various reasons. So through your research, what would you recommend to maximize forest health and decrease the likelihood of wildfires while acknowledging that more trees need to be planted?
So I feel like at this point, our research group is probably not positioned to give a recommendation. We haven't done too much research on that because we were so heavily focused on what the Forest Service is doing and how they can improve particularly. Reforestation is a part of that. They do plant seeds in certain plots of land. However, we didn't look too much into that.
One more question.
Great presentation. When you were talking about forest health before the wildfire, you mentioned that it was a conifer forest. Mm-hmm. Are conifer trees more susceptible to wildfires compared to deciduous ones?
Like I said before, I think the biggest factor is climate change because that was the driest year in many years in Wyoming, and that's just really exacerbated much of these problems. It's kind of hard to say whether or not beetle outbreaks increase the land area that a fire might burn. However, with the drier climate, drier conditions for that specific year, that was probably the biggest driver for that wildfire.
Thank you.
Thank you.